One of those teammates who was probably the most talented on the team, he liked to sometimes just do things his own way. He was a strong leader, but he didn't always follow the coach's leadership, which in this case was my leadership. Well, one particular day, he looked right at me when I had told him, no, I need you to do it this way. And he went directly against what I said in front of the whole team. And to make matters worse, he was related to my boss at the time. So I was confronted with this choice of, okay, do I hold the standard that I'm trying to hold? Do I let that one slide? Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. April is Stronger Supervisors Month here on the IDD Leader podcast. That's right. This month, we're targeting some of the essential skills that come with being a supervisor. Now, that is whether you are a frontline supervisor or many of the audience are more like executives, HR directors, these kinds of roles. But the thing is, if you manage people in any way, shape, or form, this is a big deal. Most frontline supervisors are promoted because they were good at being on the front lines, not because they had the skills to manage people. And so a predictable pattern happens. They struggle not when it comes to providing awesome direct support to those being supported, not when it comes to getting tasks done. Often they're very good at that. But when it comes to managing team dynamics, when it comes to giving corrective feedback effectively, as in it brings about changes, and so many other things. So this particular episode, as part of April's Stronger Supervisors Month, is kind of like a Q&A. I've got a few questions teed up, and I'm going to answer them just like if we were having a conversation and you were to ask me, how should I handle this situation? And without further ado, let's just get into it. All right. Question number 1. How do I stop chasing people down to have them get stuff done? Am I the only one who feels like I have to babysit certain people on my team? First of all, no, you're not the only one that feels like you have to babysit certain people on the team. I think that's a very common occurrence. Interestingly enough, that's not just happening at the front lines level, but that can happen even on executive teams where an executive director or whatever the role is, there can be someone that's really kind of high up in leadership, but you still feel like you have to make sure they get their stuff done. You don't know if their word is their word. And we could kind of spin this question about, did you get the right person on your team? And are they trustworthy? Do they follow through? Those are good considerations to have. And if things continue to fall flat over and over and over again, yeah, I would really question, is that the right person on the bus, in the right spot on the bus? But for today's conversation, what I want to cover right now is, what do you do about it if you're the boss? Well, I'm going to share with you a script that's pretty effective. It might need to get modified, but it really gets at something that I think you'll also find to be very useful. Instead of going to that person and saying something like, hey, I told you this on Tuesday, it's Thursday, I need you to get that paperwork in. Or instead of just repeating the same conversation over and over again, try this instead. Try asking the person on the team, how important do you think this task is to the rest of the team? Or how important do you think this is to our company, depending on what their role is and what the task is? And then wait, let them answer. Most of the time, the people that aren't getting this stuff done, or that you feel like you have to keep reminding or chasing down, most of the time, they probably know that it's important. And so usually they're going to articulate that's important. Occasionally, you might discover that they literally didn't know that whatever it was that you felt very strongly about needs to get done. For example, if it's putting in the case notes that make the billable happen so that the company gets paid, that might not feel that important. It might feel super repetitive, but if they don't understand that is what makes us get paid as a company for the work we're doing, then suddenly that's a teachable moment. So boom, you might actually solve it there. You might even have to go to the second part of the script. The next question though, if they kind of resonate and say like, yeah, I can see this is important to get this done. The second question is asking, what's getting in the way for you to accomplish this task? And you may have to be real specific, by a certain deadline or in a certain way if they're kind of halfway doing it or if they're turning it in late. You want to be specific there. But what's getting in the way? And then you just close your mouth and listen. Certainly can ask follow-up questions. But by asking this question, this gets them to start to identify and articulate, gosh, why am I not getting that done? And all of a sudden, instead of their problem being your problem, as in if someone on your team doesn't do something, that ultimately falls back on you as a leader. Again, whether you're in a frontline supervisor role or if you're an executive, it falls back on you. But by asking this and having them start to wrestle with or talk through what's getting in the way, you're starting to have them own the problem. And that actually was probably the biggest issue, is that if they weren't getting this task done, they probably weren't owning it enough. So as they start to articulate, and feel free to ask multiple follow-ups all on that point. Dig around a little bit. Well, I know that you get pulled in a lot of different directions because you're sometimes in coverage and you're sometimes needing to do your case notes and you're sometimes floating around and helping out here and there. But what do you think it is that's keeping it where you don't circle back to it then? Again, that's just an example. Hopefully they start to really identify something. The goal here is that they have a light bulb moment where they see themselves and this task differently. Then the third part of this would be to say, what are you going to do to make sure that we don't ever have to have this conversation again? Now, a quick note on that. I'm not meaning that to bring down the hammer and say, well, what are you going to do to make sure we never have this conversation, never have this conversation again? I don't mean it like that. That's not the intent. They have to know that you're already for them, that you're rooting for them. So I guess there is a little bit, for this to be effective, there's a bit of a prerequisite that the people on your team know that you're rooting for them. But that's not really the topic of today's episode, so we're not going to cover that more in depth. But that is a necessary prerequisite. However, when you ask, what are you going to do to make this right? Let's suppose they totally dropped the ball. What are you going to do to fix this? Maybe they dropped it, but you've already been catching it. You can say, listen, I know I've been catching it whenever you're, dropping the ball on this. I'm going to stop. What are you going to do to make sure you never drop this ball again? And again, the goal here is not to trigger defensiveness, but is to get them brainstorming about both the areas of friction that's standing in the way of them completing it, and then also what are they going to do differently? Now that that's been identified, what are they going to do differently? Boom, you have them owning it. Now, will this solve every problem of along the lines of people not following through? No, of course not. But I'd wager to say that it's going to solve 50% or more of them just by asking those three questions and doing it in a way where they feel your support and where you give them space to figure it out right there in front of you, with providing a safe space. All right, there you go. Question number 1. All right, question number 2, how quickly should I start correcting someone new on the team? I think if I come down too hard at first, they will just quit. Wow, that is a really good question. Especially if you are, this probably especially applies to frontline supervisors when you have new direct support professionals coming in or other frontline staff coming in. If you are short-staffed, the last thing in the world you want to do is drive people away. But you might notice that when they are first starting to do something, they're not totally proficient at it yet, or they're not doing it the way that your company does it. They're doing it the way that it maybe was done at their old company, or whatever the case may be. Here's my answer to this, and it might sound slightly surprising, and maybe you disagree. What tends to work best is to start correcting them immediately. But there's a big but here. But before you've even had the chance to correct them, when someone new comes on the team, it is extremely important to welcome them in, to start to ask some questions, to get to know them, and to try to build immediate rapport and connection. If you're their boss, you're their lifeline to the whole company or to their role, and what you think about their performance is going to matter a whole lot for their length of tenure and their success on the job. So before they've even really had a chance to mess anything up, I'm going to be communicating that I am rooting for them. This is a big deal. I'm going to try to build connection, rapport, and they're going to know that, hey, they're part of something that's a winning team. It matters that you showed up and that you're here now. We are so glad you're here. And on this team, we have high standards, we're high achievers, and we do awesome work. You don't have to have a whole speech memorized, but it's really about an attitude or an approach towards people. Now, when that approach is there, then I would say, how quickly do you start correcting someone? Immediately. In fact, it saves so much heartache and time and effort later. Who do you trust more? The friend that tells you that you've got something, piece of salad still stuck between your front teeth? Or the friend who says nothing and lets you go through the next hour in multiple conversations with lots of people with that piece of spinach still stuck in between your teeth? You trust the friend that told you right away. What kind of a batting coach, if you're a baseball player, what kind of a batting coach do you want? The one that just tells you, yeah, you're doing a great job, keep swinging it, all the while you're messing up some mechanic and you're moving yourself towards an injury or towards just being a less effective hitter? Or do you trust the batting coach who tells you right away, hey, you need to lift your shoulder or drop your shoulder or do this with your hips or your elbow? Again, this seems obvious. We trust the coach that tells us the truth. Why is it so hard for us to tell the truth then when we're the supervisor and somebody's new? Well, a lot of us have had a negative history ourselves personally when someone told us the truth because they did it in a way that felt bad or hurt our feelings or like they were just making a power play kind of move or whatever. So the way it's done matters a lot. A lot of us have a negative history with that. And we somehow think that this might, sometimes it's even subconscious, but we think this is going to push people away. The thing is, if someone gets pushed away by me saying, hey, I so appreciate this that you're doing. However, there's this one part that needs to change, and this is what it is. If that pushes someone away, it's someone that needs to get pushed away because on a winning team, there's lots of feedback, not just occasional feedback or hardly any feedback. And it's also not mostly negative. Again, this is kind of going, I totally jumped off the deep end on this one. I'll try to rein myself in. But if the only time they're hearing from the supervisor is for them to be corrected, then yeah, that's a negative experience. And that's not what we want here. But they should be hearing regular praise and positive feedback if they're new on a very regular basis. And even if they're established, it should still be happening quite regularly. But I'm not afraid to tell someone that they need to change right away if they're new. And I strongly advise that when I'm coaching supervisors, because then you start to build this relationship, which is I can tell you about your performance and it's okay. Now, as a supervisor, I invite those kinds of things back towards me as well. Say, hey, what can I do to help set you up for success more? Or what's missing? What are we not doing right with our system or our process? And sometimes people might be reluctant to answer that at first, but I will ask that consistently. And people that stick around, they start to learn, oh, I can tell Nate this is what needs to get fixed, or this is a problem, or this is a challenge, or this is something I don't like. And then I also try to make adjustments. So I'm modeling it. I'm showing them that I'm rooting for them, but then I'm telling them what's up. I'm not going to pretend like it didn't happen because if I do, it's just going to keep happening the wrong way. And that doesn't help anybody in the situation, including me. It just means that it's going to be a more loaded conversation later. This gets easier. I need to tell you that. This gets easier. If this is a stretch, especially maybe an executive forwarded this episode to you. If this is a stretch for you and you're a frontline supervisor, it will get easier. The more that you do it, it becomes more natural over time. And all those, if you're like a non-confrontational person, like I kind of am by nature, the butterflies in your stomach or that feeling of, anxiety that, oh, I got to tell this person, it gets a lot easier once you start doing it early on and kind of keeping that coach metaphor in mind. Like, oh, I'm just trying to help them improve their swing. Well, that doesn't sound like such a bad thing. I'm just trying to help set them up for success in their role at this job. Oh, well, then it's not such a big deal. And I don't need to treat it like a big deal, but I do need them to change or fix whatever they were doing that wasn't the right way. Okay, question number 3. There's 2 people on my team that I know don't get along. I can tell it pulls down team morale. As their boss, is there a way I can fix it? Well, yeah, this is an interesting question. There are there are things you can do to fix it. First question is, have you already been talking with them about their professional relationships with their colleagues individually? I mean, have you talked to both parties individually? In other words, is there a troublemaker here? If there's someone that is consistently causing problems, I want them off the team. Now, that's kind of the short answer. We're going to get into the slightly more nuanced answer for someone where that's not the case. But if this is a chronic, consistent problem with one individual, like, again, I got standards for my teams. And that is the best way to have a stable workforce, is to have good minimum standards, even at the front lines level, even for direct support professionals, even if you're hurting for staff and have vacancies and overtime, all that stuff. Because within the lack of standards, you're guaranteeing to have high turnover, high vacancies. But with higher standards, you might still get at first some turnover. Yes, it takes a little while to get everything squared away, but over a period of time, you will see that it's the only way to ensure that you actually lower that turnover. Okay, I'm off the soapbox of that for a moment. Back to the actual question, which is, well, what am I supposed to do if I can see that there's a conflict that's pulling down team morale? I'll start with the first step, which is, hopefully, maybe you already did this, but let's just start there. Have you talked to each person individually and just ask them, hey, what's going on with your relationship with this other team person? Or tell me I feel like I'm observing something. It looks like there's tension in the room. I hear it in your tone of voice or in their tone of voice towards you. Or I've heard you complain 3 times in the last 3 days about this one colleague. What's going on? So asking questions individually to each person separately. That's where I'd start. Sometimes that alone can start to get something unstuck. Getting the person to be aware that they're acting out of this and that it's affecting the team. So I'll ask questions. I may also share, I see that this is affecting team morale. This is something we need to help get this addressed and fixed. What would you like to do about it? What do you want to do differently? What do you think you're contributing that's causing this conflict to be worse? And as soon as you start to ask questions like that, if someone's really gotten under their skin, they're going to probably respond defensively, or even more likely than that, they'll be blaming. They'll be talking about how the other person this, the other person that. And when someone starts to say that, a lot of times I'll say, okay, I hear you. I hear you that there's a lot that they're doing. But let's back up for just a moment. Even if it's 90% them, and it might not be, but even if it's 90% them, what's the 10% that you're doing that's contributing to this conflict continuing to go on? And sometimes I have to ask that question multiple times. But a lot of times what will happen is I'll see them start to realize, oh, yeah, there's this one thing I'm doing too. They'll say, well, this is okay, great. That one thing, what can you do differently about that one piece? Because that might be the thing that gets this unstuck or makes it get better. Okay, so that's all sort of approach one, which is individual with each person. If there is signs of hope there, but things are still going on, I may very well address it either to the two of them together or to the whole team, not in a way that embarrasses anybody, but I might reestablish what the standards are on this team and it's almost like I come from a clinical background. So there's times when I'm working with a family and I could feel like they just weren't really buying into treatment. They weren't really interested or whatever. So then I'll often kind of go right back to sort of recontract with them. Go back to the very beginning. Okay, when we had talked initially, you'd said that you really wanted to work on this particular thing. Do you still want to work on that? Do you think that the way I've assessed that or the way we're approaching that is in line with what your goals are? In other words, we kind of go back to the very beginning. Now, translating that over to what that looks like on a team, I'm not exactly going to say, hey, do you still want to work here? Because that could kind of sound like a threat. So I won't exactly say it that way, but I might say, hey, on our team, we expect that there are going to be personal differences. We expect that we're not always going to see eye to eye, but we do expect that we're going to have each other's back, not stabbing each other's backs. We're going to be there for one another, because the only way we thrive, the only way our individuals win and live their best life ever is when we when we work together as a team. And so then I'll kind of ask, if you want to be part of this team, I'm expecting that you'll be willing to swallow your pride, get over personal differences, and support each and every other person on the team. If something they're doing doesn't line up with our agreed upon standards as a team, certainly you can tell me that, and I will try to help address that and fix that. But if they just, if they're a Democrat and you're a Republican, or if they're a Swiftie and you're not a Swiftie, or if they just are annoying and you have a short fuse, so you get annoyed easily, none of those are good enough reasons to not work together at a high level. And so having a team meeting moment like that, or a moment with the two of them, I'm not going to step in the middle and play counselor and try to untangle every single little thing. I'm going to set the standard and say, this is what I expect, provide that kind of clarity, and then I'm going to hold them to that. And from there, I'm going to be looking for ways I can call out when I see them making adjustments and doing, getting along better. Or I'm going to also, just like we talked about before, we address things right away. I'm going to tell them if I see that there's continue to be these dynamics. And if that is really an issue and it's continuing, then yeah, we might look into involving HR or making a change in roles or positions. But I'm not going to let that just simmer under the surface for an extended period of time. It's so toxic. It really destroys morale. So yeah, there is some ways that you can fix it as the boss. Yes, it's pulling down team morale. And those are some thoughts on how to make it better. Fourth and final question. I've got one person on my team who seems like they keep going against what I tell the team to do. It's never the big stuff that would get them fired. It's just the little things, but it feels kind of passive aggressive. All right, this is a little similar to what we were just talking about before, but let me tell you about a time. I was leading a team, and I was basically a coach. I was coaching a team, and one of those teammates, who was probably the most talented on the team, he liked to sometimes just do things his own way. He was a strong leader, but he didn't always follow the coach's leadership, which in this case was my leadership. Usually, if I just said, hey, I really do need you to do it this way, he would usually just kind of, in a good way, get in line. And I'm not a big bossy person. It's not hard to be in line with the instructions I'm giving. Well, one particular day, he looked right at me when I had told him, no, I need you to do it this way. And he went directly against what I said in front of the whole team. And to make matters worse, he was related to my boss at the time. So I was confronted with this choice of, okay, do I hold the standard that I'm trying to hold? Do I let that one slide? And I hesitated for a moment because I thought this could be a costly decision. I hope it's not for my own sake. But I decided, no, there's no way we can function as a team if I let someone just go directly against what I'm saying, even if it's kind of a small thing. And so I confronted him. I did not embarrass him in front of everybody else, but as the very first moment that I could create a moment, and I actually created the moment pretty quickly, I pulled him aside and I said, listen, that's not okay. You're going to have to take a break from this level of responsibility that you had, because he was in kind of a team lead role. And I was in a position where I didn't have to check with HR. It was a volunteer team that I was coaching. But obviously you might need to check with HR or something if you're, demoting someone. My goal wasn't to ultimately demote him, but it was to say, I need to hold this standard, even with the little stuff. Now, I ended up doing that, and I said, listen, for the next, I forget what it was at this time, maybe it was 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks, you can't do this thing that I know that that's one of your responsibilities that you take pride in doing, but I'm going to give that to someone else because I really need it done the way that we've established as an organization. This is how we're doing things, and not just in the way that you personally think is best. And if you'd like, I would love for you to get back in that role. Everybody looks up to you, that you've got a lot of strengths. But this one piece about making sure that you do it the way that's the team way or the company way, that's a non-negotiable. So I did that. Of course, I was really nervous about how that might play out with my boss, but he ended up really supporting me. And he said, no, you needed to do that. I'm glad that you did. And so everything worked out fine. And after those, I think it was 2 weeks, he came back and stepped into that responsibility that he had from before. And from that moment on, once he knew that I really meant what I said, when I'm saying these are the standards for our team and we will do it this way that I'm saying, sure, did he push back here and there? Of course he did. He didn't change his whole personality. But he respected me more than he ever had before. And a lot of that passive aggressive stuff just sort of fizzled out. So how would I apply that to this question? That someone seems like they're going against what you're saying. Well, I would call them out on it immediately. I wouldn't let it keep going. And I would do it not in front of other people. We're not trying to embarrass somebody. But I'd say, hey, I really meant those standards, or our company really means, this policy is this policy. It's not this policy for some people, but not for others, or there's all these exceptions. No, we really mean this policy. So I'm expecting you to abide by it. And I'm not looking to, I wouldn't necessarily look to, demote them right away, but I would make it very clear, this is the consequence if you continue. And get it in writing if you need to get it in writing, or whatever else. But the bottom line is, if that's happening on your team, and I understand how that's easy to have that happen when you've got some strong personalities, but it's your job to stop that. And it ends up being a reflection on you. And what it also will do is other strong and healthy and good team players, if they see that somebody is getting away with things or is going against certain things kind of quietly and on the side, it will make them want to move on, because they don't want to tolerate the team player that's not really acting as a team player either. So it's of critical importance to move right away on those. Honestly, that's probably the biggest piece, is to address it right away. And, if someone ends up going against any of the policies, ultimately that can be a fireable thing. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully they just realize, oh, you meant what you said, and you really mean it. Okay, I can step up into that. And especially sometimes they might not do it if they don't understand why it's important. I'm happy to help connect the dots for them. But I would not tolerate that attitude, and I want to encourage you not to tolerate it either. All right, well, hopefully you found this episode to be helpful. Let me give you an action move real quick. Whichever one of these 4, if any of them, resonated with your own personal leadership, or maybe you're in a role where you're an executive and you're seeing these things playing out on your teams, I would encourage you, well, you certainly could pass on this episode, but more than that, address it. Address it. Give the person that's in the supervisor tools of how they can address that thing on their team. Most of the time, supervisors want to do right. They're trying their hardest. But a lot of us, we were never trained when we came into being a boss or being a supervisor. We weren't trained on what it was to manage people. We were trained on the tasks that needed to get done. We were trained on the paperwork. We were trained on a lot of things, but not necessarily trained on the mechanics of, well, how do I have that conversation, that coachable moments conversation? How do I start correcting that new person right away? The script I gave you at the beginning about chasing somebody down. A lot of us were never trained on that at first. And so give the person those tools. Or if it's happening on your team, you yourself on your team, then hopefully you can use one of the tools I just gave you right now on how to address it. Now, I also want to share with you that we're about to launch what's called the Leadership Lab. And it's a place where I teach these exact skills and help bring these exact kinds of shifts to frontline supervisors. It's training them on how to manage people effectively. Now, I almost don't like the word training, because usually when I hear training, I think sit in front of a computer and zone out, or here's some cool ideas. What I'm talking about is skill building. The goal and what happens in the Leadership Lab is that a supervisor will build leadership skills. They will get better at creating coachable moments. They will get better at showing people that they appreciate them and building rapport. They will get better at correcting them effectively and upholding the standards and other things we didn't even talk about, running a team meeting, managing other types of team dynamics. If you want more info to get the whole scoop, check out iddleader.com/leadership. And there's also a contact button there. If you want to set up a touch point, I'm happy to. I've been talking with a lot of different agencies lately. Just had one sign up a couple of days ago with their whole team of supervisors signed up for the Leadership Lab. But the next cohort starts in May. So the signups, if you're listening to this in real time, they're coming up soon. So go ahead and check that out if that would be of service to you. And even if you just want a free resource, you can go check out, I think it might pop up when you go into iddleader.com, or you can go to supervisors.com/burnout. And there's a free resource tool for how supervisors are sometimes unintentionally contributing to staff burnout and then what to do about it. It walks through a similar but different kinds of things as what we talked about today. But if you're at all considering, how can I help my supervisors at my agency get the kinds of things that you talked about today in the episode, then definitely want to encourage you, check out the Leadership Lab. It is a blast, and I cannot wait for the next cohort to start. All right. Well, until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.